Welcome to my session, Power Up Microsoft Teams with the Power Platform at the 5th Global Power Platform Bootcamp 2024. My name is Ben Stedjink, and in this session, we're going to dive into Microsoft Teams and what you can do when you start combining Microsoft Teams and the Power Platform. The session abstract said Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI. We may take a little look at Power BI. We are primarily going to focus on Power Apps and Power Automate. Depending on how the time goes, we may or may not even get to Power BI. I'll at least make some mentions of some of the things you can do, how you could expand on what we're going to go through and some of the demos with Power BI today. But before we get to that, a little bit about me. Like I said, my name is Ben Stedjink. I am in Jacksonville, Florida, and I have 4 kids. I am the owner. I'm the chief cloud consultant, chief architect, chief trainer, all of those things at Intelligent. I started the company about 12 years ago now with a background in SharePoint. I've been working with SharePoint since SharePoint 2003. And as things have moved to the cloud, expanded into really Microsoft 365 management and managing the Microsoft 365 platform as a whole. How that starts tying in a little bit to Power Platform is, one, I just love to tinker with things, build things. My degree is engineering, so I enjoy still building things. And some of what I've done is tried to take the Power Platform, Power Apps, Power Automate, and build solutions in particular that help me as an administrator. So in this session, we are going to take that Power Platform and build some administrative tools, look at how you can integrate these together, and use examples that I've built when it comes to management. I also co-host the Microsoft Cloud IT Pro podcast. I've been doing this with a friend of mine, Scott Hogue, for over 6 years now. And we've released an episode weekly. This year, we've scaled back to every other week, but all things Azure, Microsoft 365, really, again, from that admin side of things, IT pros, a little bit of end users. We try to avoid the developer stuff. So even as we go through the session, it's not going to be super developer heavy. There might be a little bit sprinkled in here and there. I'm also a Microsoft 365 MVP, a Microsoft 365 certified trainer, an MCT, as well as have a few certifications here in cybersecurity, Microsoft 365, and Azure. One other thing, I did have some stuff come up today on Saturday when this session is being shown. So I may or may not be around in the chat to answer questions during this session. If you do have questions, feel free to reach out via my website, intelligent.com. You can email me. Let me throw my email slide up here a minute. So any questions, bstedjink@intelligent.com. So feel free to email me, reach out on LinkedIn and ask questions if I'm not here and you have any questions that you want addressed during this session. I did mention I also do training, getting some Microsoft 365 admin training going. You can check that out on my website as well, intelligent.com. So diving into the session and looking at how you can use the Power Platform to power up teams, to enhance teams, and some of those options and things that are available. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the Power Platform and Teams, like we've already said. How can you combine these two? And we're going to look at 2 specific examples, but these examples are going to show how you can integrate these 2 together. The first we're going to look at is governing teams with the Power Platform, how you can leverage Power Apps, Power Automate to build a Teams governance solution. This is also where you could start tying in Power BI a little bit to do some reporting on the solution we're going to build. And then after that, we'll dive into how you can actually enhance Teams with Power Apps, some ways that you can pull Power Apps into Teams to take advantage of that integration there between those 2 platforms in the Microsoft 365 stack. So kind of continuing along that topic is, where do they integrate? The Power BI app is one. within Microsoft Teams, you can always add the Power BI app in. You can build Power BI reports right within Teams. You can embed Power BI reports in Teams so you can access them, view some of those reports right there in Microsoft Teams. And actually, the same thing with Power Automate and with Power Apps is even build some of these things right within Teams. Sometimes I joke around that Microsoft Teams is becoming the default browser for Microsoft 365 in terms of you can integrate all these things into Microsoft Teams, spend your entire day in Microsoft Teams, building things, working on projects, communicating with people. The only thing you can't do is check your email. I actually hope email doesn't come to Microsoft Teams. I like being able to keep my email separate from my chat, but that's a topic for another presentation. Other things you can do when it comes to Power Automate specifically is uh, managing approvals in Teams. If you want to manage some of the approvals, if you want to work with Power Apps in different way or workflows, Power Automate flows. Another topic around that I could dive into. We're gonna stay focused as we're working through this. And then Power Apps. There's a lot of different ways Power Apps actually integrate, from creating a Teams app to creating a tab. Power Virtual Agents, you can build bots. This is one, the Power Virtual Agents, we're not going to dive into. This is probably a session all on its own in building Power Virtual Agents, tying them into Teams. But I wanted to make you aware of just some of these different places where you can take the Power Platform and work with that integration and tie the Power Platform services, various things in it, into Teams. So let's check this out. Let's start diving into it. Again, Teams, Power Apps, Power Automate, that's going to be our focus today as we go in and start looking at really powering up Microsoft Teams. First of all, managing Teams with the Power Platform. We're going to start with this looking at Power Apps. And some of the integrations, we're going to start with Power Apps and lists. This could potentially be a Power Virtual Agent as well. Create a bot for people to go in and request a team that way. Again, entirely different topic, but it would be an option. We're going to look at this from Power Apps and building that team. Then we're going to leverage Power Automate to go in and actually create a team, build a workflow that builds out a team based on that request that we have in Power Apps. And then finally, you could use Power BI to start reporting on these teams, reporting on the creation of these teams, how long ago they were created, maybe even tying in different usage statistics, leveraging some different functions to pull usage statistics out of the SharePoint site, maybe looking at users in these teams, how many users have been added. There's lots of different ways you could incorporate different scripts and different processes to pull details out about the teams into Power BI. So with that, we're actually going to dive into demos. I like demos. I mentioned this. I like to tinker. I'm going to try not to spend too much on slides, but really focus on showing you how you can go in and do some of this stuff. So let's jump out of our PowerPoint presentation and jump over here into SharePoint. And SharePoint is where we're going to start with all of this. So I actually have a list here in my SharePoint environment, and you can see this is a group or team request SharePoint list. Every team, more or less, has different Microsoft 365 groups that power it. So it makes sense. If you're going to go in and turn off Microsoft 365 group creation, you're also going to turn off Microsoft Teams creation. You want a solution that enables you to build both or have your users request both of these. So this is going to be your group or team request. First thing I did is I just went in and created those columns. We want a title. What is the name of this going to be? What's that access type? Is this going to be a public team? Is this going to be a private team? Some of the other settings that you have when you create a Microsoft 365 group specifically, but also apply to Teams, is allowing external emails. Maybe you have a display name, what that URL is going to be of that group that you're creating. And then I added some additional information in here, and we're going to see where this starts coming into play as what is the type of request for this team? What is this team going to be used for? Different things around owners, visible in the address book, friendly alias. Maybe you want to be able to track department names. And this is where one of those could come in with Power BI as users are requesting these different sites. Maybe you want to see, is there a specific department that they're creating all kinds of teams or certain departments that don't have any? Is this team for a project? And is there a specific end date on it? So you can report on teams that have the project end date passed and if you still need it around. And then I actually have one hidden column. We're going to get to that one a little later. So this is that list for those group sites. This is going to be the foundation of this provisioning process. The first thing I did when it came to this list is I wanted to go in and tweak this form a little bit. Let's say something like the project end date. What if it's not a project site? Maybe we don't care about having a project end date. Or, and here you'll notice my URLs. I have P for project, T for team, a D for demo, and then a bunch of demo sites down here. What if I don't want my users coming up with URLs and I want to formulate these automatically? You'll notice I also have another list over here, group provisioning configuration or config. And if you go pop open this list, it actually has my site number in here. So I create the URLs. I choose what that URL structure is going to be, what that number is going to be in the URL. So I didn't want users to pick that. So I went in and I went to my integrations and Power Automate, and not Power Automate, Power Apps, and I customized my form. This form customization, I started out with, it's pretty simple. I just made a few small tweaks to this Power App form, or this SharePoint list form in Power Apps, and went in and did things. Let's skip over this, like the group URL. I just turned this into a read-only field. So users don't have the option to edit the group URL. I did things like the project end date, and you can adjust the visibility on these, where I only display this if my project date is true, and that is driven off of the type of site that I request. So my type of request here, once I go in and choose it, let's go in and look at that on select. I'm looking at what that is. If this is a project or a demo, I'm going to display the project end date, because maybe for demo sites, I do want to set a project end date on it. If this is a team site, I'm not going to display that project end date. So I just hide that so users don't feel like they have to fill it out. And then went in and set some of these toggles around external email, visible in address book. So again, relatively basic here. Set the access type. That's an important one for that dropdown. So now when users go in, and we're not going to save this one, and click to create a new team site, they can choose what it is they want to call it. And we'll call this the Global Power Platform Bootcamp 2024 site. You can see no options for the URL here. Just copy this. We'll leave that for the display name as well. And maybe we want this a public site. Here's where you can see that project end date. If I choose this as a team site, my project end date goes away. Intranet site, it's not there. But project site, that starts showing up, or a demo site. So this demo, we'll end it in a week from now. We don't need this for a long time. Secondary owner, this is a people picker. This is a people picker column in my list. So I'm logged in right now as... I'm actually logged in right now as myself. I'm going to make this demo user my secondary owner. Department, I've done a lot of information technology. Maybe this is for the executive department. Friendly alias is going to be related to email. Again, this could be one, maybe you have it. Maybe you just take the title or the display name. And I'm not going to allow external emails. I don't want this visible in an address book. And I go ahead and save this request. So this request gets added to my list now. Now what do I do with it? Do I want this automatically created? You'll notice I don't have a URL yet. I actually send this through an approval process. So this starts taking advantage of some of those approvals. So while I wait for the email, let's actually go in and look at what is going on here with this particular workflow. I'm going to close that. On the backside of this, I started taking advantage of Power Automate. So if we jump over here to Power Automate and my flows, this is where I did this group and team provisioning workflow. Let's go look at this. You'll see I should have one running here because every time a new site request gets put in, I trigger one of these workflows. And we're going to take a look at it real quick here, and then I'll show you some of what I did where I start an approval process. And then after that approval process, I go in and perform certain actions in my Power Automate flow based on that request. So that one's running. Let's go actually edit this now. Here's where you'll see, actually, let's open this. Let's just do the approval here a quick a minute. I did get the email for the approval here, but here's that new group or team request. So I could go in, take a look at this request. Yep, this is fine. We'll go in, approve it, confirm. So that's off and creating now. But what this flow does, like I said, when a new item is created, it's looking at that provisioning request, simply just starts an approval. Yes or no, this is always getting sent to me. You could send this to a manager, you could send this to a group. There's lots of options you have with these approvals. I have first to respond, so you could send this to 3 or 4 people. And as long as one of them responds, it's all good. I did include a link to the item, so someone could go and review that request in the list and go through some of those other settings that someone set, maybe around external email, global address book, private or public. This is where I start actually building that URL. So I get a group prefix, and then I initialize the SharePoint URL variable, and then we start going in and looking at conditions. If it got rejected, it's just an immediate no. This condition, I should expand it, is just looking at that approval response. If it gets rejected, I send an email. If not, I actually go out to my SharePoint list that we looked at before, this group provisioning configuration, and grab the latest number from this list, this value right here in my workflow, and store that. And then I set the prefix. So this is a really wide switch, but it's just using a switch and just simply setting that prefix to D underscore, I underscore, whatever I want for that prefix that we saw before, the D for demos, P for project, based on what type of request was filled out in that dropdown. Set up the group alias. This is just doing a concatenation of that prefix plus what people typed in. I set the variable for the SharePoint URL. So this is taking my SharePoint environment and building out the full URL because I want people to be able to also see that URL if they'd go back to the list or once they get an email that their site was created. And then I go in and do some automation. This one, we're not going to dive down this left-hand path at all, create job. This is if I wanted a Microsoft 365 group. I created this demo so I could use it for a few things. One of them is showing running PowerShell scripts in Azure Automation. I have done an entire session just on building these out, but this essentially takes all those different parameters from the list, sends it to a PowerShell script running in Azure Automation, and creates just a Microsoft 365 group. On the other side, and this is if somebody says to create a team or create a group, I go in and create a team. So this just goes in and takes that group display name, sets the display name based on what was entered, the title for the description, and sets the visibility. If you wanted to go in and configure additional options around that, there are some more team actions here. So we can go look at Microsoft Teams. If you wanted to build in things where you look through teams for matching names, you could do that. Here's the create a team. If you wanted to build in security, so people could select who they want to be a member of that team at the time of creation, you could also build that into that form. and add members to a team as a part of it. Create tags within the team if you have maybe defined tags that you use for tagging people in a team. Some of those create additional channels. Maybe you give people an option if they need multiple channels within the team, or you have some default channel options. You could build those into the request. There's a lot of functionality now that you could build in that provisioning of a team in terms of here's once you create those tags, adding certain members to the tag, lots of different options. So different things you can do there within Power Automate to even build out something like this workflow further in terms of the capabilities and what you may request in that form. Once that team is created, I go back in and update the list item. Now, what this is doing is this is actually updating one of those hidden fields I didn't show you, this new team ID. And we're going to come back to this a little bit later on when we dive into the second topic of starting to actually embed some of these different Power Apps and what you can do with Power Apps within Teams. So let's minimize that. After I update that item, I go send an email and let the person know your team, your Microsoft 365 group has been created. The subject, here's the link. So this is part of the reason I built out that URL earlier, is now I can go grab that SharePoint URL that we built out all the way up here so that they have it right in their email to go access their team. Or their SharePoint site that's associated with the team. This uses the SharePoint site, not the team URL. You could build this out to be teams.microsoft.com, use that team ID, and build out the full URL to the team as well. I'm going to have to note that down to do that in a future version of this presentation. I increment that group number. I don't want another team with the same group number. So I go set that config list, update that group number, and then I finally update that site request list, that team request list with the SharePoint URL. Again, this is another one right here where I could also create a group URL for the SharePoint site. I could also create the Teams URL for the Teams site, put even more information into that list so that other users could take advantage of it, or so that your users could take advantage of it, see that information. Here you can see my flow ran successfully. It went all the way through this. Let's go look at the user automation. It created a team, spit back that team name. Here's that team ID, updated the item. So now if I would go back and look at this SharePoint list and my group or team site request, here's that team. And you'll notice because I updated this, it also now displays this URL here with this D_064. And I could click on that URL, copy and paste it out, and that site would hopefully be there because I do build that site out manually. Or if it's just being pokey in creating it. But trust me, it's there. So that's that provisioning request that's showing that team showing up in the list. Again, you could now go into Power BI and actually take Power BI. You can use SharePoint list as a data source for Power BI and start building some of those reports and dashboards off of this SharePoint list to give a nice, friendly dashboard for people on what those teams are, what's been created. You could also let people see this list if they wanted to go view group information. You may want to be a little careful with it if you're creating a bunch of private sites in here. Maybe they're private for a reason. You don't want users to know that they necessarily exist out there. But that's that group or team request workflow that you can build out to help manage those. One thing I would say, if you're going this route from an admin perspective, is that you do want to go in and probably limit the team creation in Teams itself. So one of the big things, if I'm going to go this provisioning route, is I want to start, I don't want to allow people, and you'll see I think I actually do have it turned off. Do I have it turned off? I don't have it turned off in my tenant. You want to prevent people from going in and creating a team this way. The provisioning package using Power Automate, Power Apps can really help with just making sure you don't end up with a lot of teams. I talk to a lot of clients where I go in and they haven't disabled this, and they don't even know the amount of teams they have, or we go in and take a look at it and they're like, I had no idea I had that many teams. So just something to keep in mind as you are setting that up. If you do want to know more about um, limiting that, you can go out and just search for blocking Microsoft 365 group creation, team creation. It's a pretty straightforward PowerShell script, ties it to a security group to limit that. One thing that you may also look at is, you noticed in here, you still have to send people to the list to create sites. I mentioned maybe you don't want to show private. You could do that with views, but security may still be something where you just don't want people seeing this list, entering them in here. What you could do, and what I did, is you could also go in and build a Power App to make this a standalone application. So I did go in and just created one really quickly here, where I did create a Power App. I wanted to give us a little bit of a head start. And this one still has some of those other options available. Like, I still have attachments on here. All you have to do is go into some of these and start setting like visibility of attachments. We don't even care about seeing this. We can set that to false. Group URL, this was one of those where I made it, let's unlock it. Display mode, I just want this to be read only, so we can make our display mode to be view only for that group URL. You can rearrange fields on here. You can make this look a lot prettier. Like I said, you could go in and add some of those extra things we looked at with teams in here. You could even create a second screen in here where you would maybe create a table. So if we went and created a new screen over here and inserted, we could insert, I'll just search for it, insert a data table into this and look at those group or team sites. And you'd have to customize this some, but set it up so that this table and these items, you set a filter on it where this is like a filter group team sites where the access type, do need to look at the value of that equals, and this would be like public, close that. And then it would filter out any of the private ones. You could do this based on, do another filter as well based on who created it, and then create this as a second screen to your Power App. And maybe back on screen one, we could add a button. So let's go look at a button here. And this is just doing something like navigate to screen two. And this would just be like view site list. And we can hold down Option, gives us a nice quick way to navigate around. And then maybe on this one, we add a button or even an icon. There's icons, right? Let's do icon or home. There we go. We'll add a home icon here. And same thing here, we could do on select of this. We would navigate back to our screen one so that we can jump back and forth between our two screens in the app. So let's go save this and publish this one. And this would give us now a way to put this app standalone. So people don't necessarily have to navigate to the SharePoint site anymore to fill out the requests. Instead, you could just share this app with people and let them navigate right to this app itself to go in and do the provisioning. So once this app loads, so I could go fill out another site request here. I could view the site list, let it jump back and forth, and be able to see here, again, format it, create some of those links out of those group URLs, fill out new team requests. So now this creates a way to do a new team request, have it be a standalone app, and keep people away from maybe that SharePoint site that's working on the back end to keep track of all these requests, just segment people a little bit more from that list. So now that we've built our team site request and done some stuff with that, I'm actually going to jump back to the presentation for a few minutes before we jump into our next demo, to just talk about a couple things that we can do here. Let's move into Power Apps and Teams. The first part of this presentation, we were really looking at how do I go in and leverage Power Apps and Power Automate to build that provisioning solution. Another way that you can power up your teams with the Power Platform is by actually bringing some of these Power Apps into Microsoft Teams. And this actually gets really interesting. This is something I just started playing with maybe a year or two ago. So this has been around for a little while, but it's not something that I necessarily see a lot of people talking about. It's some of the cool things you can do when it comes to putting Power Apps in Teams. So a couple things I'm going to talk about here for just a few minutes, and we're going to look at a demo. The first of these is context variables. One thing that every team has is a team has certain properties around it. And depending on how you bring your Power Apps into Teams, you can pass these properties into a Power App as context variables. And there's probably about 10 or 11 of them now that you can pass this in, and it actually does things like helps you identify maybe your role in a team. It helps you identify what team it's in. But there are a couple areas where this, frankly, completely falls apart. Primarily when it comes to some of the shared channels and private channels. And we're going to take a look at this too. But what this really does is allows you to send information from a specific team into your Power App, which opens up a lot of different possibilities. And I'm going to show you some of those in a minute. The other thing you can do, and I might actually flip the order we look at these in the demo, is taking a Power App now and creating your own Teams app from it. And not only can you go in and do a Teams app from it, but you can do what's called deep linking. So if you've never played with deep linking, there's a few different places you can do this. What deep linking does is it allows you to create a URL that brings you to a Power App, and it brings you to a very specific data item that Power App is associated with. So I've also done, this is outside of Power Apps, I've done deep linking from a SharePoint list where I actually go in and replace the title field. So something like our site request, where you go in and create a link. So if someone clicks the title in your SharePoint list or clicks a link, it takes them right into Power Apps to that SharePoint list item loaded in the Power App instead of opening it in that list view. Deep linking in a Teams app allows you to also do deep linking where it pulls you all the way into a Power App in Teams, loading a very specific list item. So think through a scenario where you have a Power Automate flow. Somebody goes in and maybe it's with a Power App, maybe it's straight in the SharePoint list, and fills out some type of information. This triggers a Power App. It's an approval notification, maybe. We looked at that already with the email. Maybe this is some other notification that it could get posted in a Teams chat, could be a notification that comes via URL or it comes via email. But that URL then can have a link built in such a way that when someone clicks on it, instead of going to the SharePoint list item, or instead of just going to even a generic app in Teams, it takes you all the way into that Power App in Teams and then loads that list item that notification was sent about. We're not going to go all the way through and build the deep linking, but I will show you a link, and there's a link in this deck. You'll have access to this deck after the presentation where it guides you through how you can go in and start formulating these deep links. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into a demo and look at some of the stuff you can do. So first of all, just a couple different bits of documentation. We're going to start with this deep linking. This is a sample app and solution that is on learn.microsoft. This is a crisis communication sample app in Power Apps. This is a long article on Microsoft Learn, but it does walk you through a bunch of different things that you can do in Power Apps. I would go explore this as well as start exploring even some of the other apps. But if you scroll all the way down in here, down further, down further, down further, notification. So this is where I started talking about notifications, setting up a notification flow. So if you have that notification flow set up and that notification flow is sending something when a new item is posted, more than 5,000 users, here's that optional deep linking. So this is where if you want a Teams notification to open directly into the Canvas app inside of Teams, this is what you would do. And it walks you through the whole thing. And this would make more sense if you went through the whole application itself. But it's a teams.microsoft.com link. You're going in and looking at an entity, passing in the app ID, and then in here, you also go in and set up some additional, here's some of that context variable stuff we talked about, and I'm going to go show you some of that, some app ID, and build out a URL that essentially takes you straight to that particular item. So this documentation, great for something like that. The other thing you can do, and part of getting set up for this, is actually taking that Teams app and embedding it right in Teams as an app. So let's go in, and I don't know why this new, that's what I wanted. So I messed that up earlier. I want this form mode to be new. By default, this is also interesting. When you go in and insert a form, it really gives you edit form and display form. So when I created this, I just did edit form. I was not paying attention to what I was doing. I want this to be a new form. Now I can save it. Let's go in and publish this version that is a new form. And now if I play it, yeah, this should work better now. Okay, now this is loading new site request. So here's one of the things that gets kind of cool. Let's say we talked about this where you could view the site list, you could put in a new request. What if you want people to be able to request a team from inside of Teams? If you go back to your apps and we look at this new team request, this is the one we were just working on. You can do a share. Whoops. You can do a share here. And one of your share options is add to Teams. So it's like, okay, I can get into this. I want to add this to Teams. Add to Teams, and let's cancel this and use the web app instead. This will pop open Teams, and right from here, gives you that new team request, and you can click add right here, and it actually adds it over in Teams here as an application. So now I can go in and I can pin this, I can do whatever I want to with this new Teams app for myself, where I can go even drag it up above OneDrive, even Engage here. And now I have this app in here, so as I navigate up here, or I want a new Teams request, I can come down and do that. However, what you may run into, if I go, is Teams and channels. I'm not getting it for this user. If I go look at my apps, you can see I have some apps here, built for your organization. I don't have that app. So I'm not getting this to all the users. I was able to add it for myself as an app, but I wasn't necessarily able to go make this available to everyone else. And this is me, sorry, I am in as my demo user now, not my normal user. So if I go back to my other tab here, and new team requests, go back to my Power Apps, I also have this option to download the app. If I go package this application up, it gives me a download, and we can go just save this to my downloads for now as that new teams request.zip. If I go over to my admin center now and upload a new app and choose upload, I can go look at my downloads and find my new Teams request, open this up, and upload this application to my Teams admin center. So now I have a new app added. Hooray, I get a thumbs up. Now that I can go to my app list and manage it, I can go, once everything loads here, and I should have, let's see, new teams, new team. There it is. There's my new team request app. So now it's actually in my app catalog. I can go now and add this to a specific team, or I can go into my Teams app and my setup policies, and this global one for everybody. You can see I'm adding my IntelliLink, but if I want this to install for all my users, I can go add permission and new team request, add this and add it. It'll actually now go push it down to all my users. I could also make that a pinned app if I wanted to, but now I have this Microsoft Teams app that's globally available for all of my users to use and be able to request sites. Now that I added this, we'll see how quick Teams refreshes. Let's go reload my Teams as my demo user. Maybe you don't want to push it down, but you just want people to be able to install it. See if it pushed it down yet. Yeah, it's still there, but it has not shown up yet for this user. Eventually, that would show up here. You would have that app built for your org that you could then go and install. So every user could get to that app and start provisioning their own sites and doing it that way. So again, a really cool way to integrate Power Apps into Teams and expand those apps and how people can get to them, what they can see, and provide an application right within Teams for users to fill information out. Some medical ones where they're using Power Apps to maybe manage certain information around patients that come in. And now you can make that as its own app right within Teams. So another really cool option there. Now, the next one. Let's jump all the way back to this one. We're done with Teams admin. Eventually, that should show up for my users to set up. But the last one we talked about was those context variables. So this was crisis management, embed an app, use contexts from Teams. This goes in, and this is that documentation that shows you what are some of those context variables you can pass in. And this is under personal apps. So the locale, the channel ID, the channel type, chat ID, group ID, the host client type, sub-entity IDs if you want to pass in an additional parameter in part of the URL, team ID, team type, themes, team user role. So this lists out what all those parameters are. It does say this was added in March of 2020. So, this is actually 4 years old now. If your app is older than that, you may need to re-add it to Teams to use this functionality. But those are all the context variables. This is like the documentation on this is not great. It's like, okay, here's a little bit of Power App code on how you can use context from Teams. I mean, to me, this doesn't show you a whole lot. So let's go in and look at what you can actually do with this. So I have a couple Power Apps here, and the first one is just this test context variables. So this is just a basic app that shows you how you can use those parameters. So really all you need to do to go in and grab those is from this, we can skip this, from this list where we looked at the parameters, let's use the theme. I don't know what's going to get returned in theme, but we're going to find out. It's probably the color, whether it's dark mode or light mode. All you need to do, like here I just added a bunch of labels so I could identify them. So we could go in and add one more text label here. And this would be, we said this is like the theme. And then next to these, I actually do have hidden labels. All I'm doing is just doing param. Locale, so this would be pulling in the locale here. This is doing team type, parameter team type, subentity. So for theme, we could go in and add ourselves another label here. Oops, we don't want to shrink it down. Do theme, and the text here would be param, and you'll see that does autocomplete, and it is a string, so our param theme, and hit save and publish this. So that's, again, all there is. These are just different parameters, and this is just showing me the value. This is how I got started with context variables. Was I just wanted to see like what kind of information actually got pulled in to a Power App. So now what you do, once you have your Power App created, you have some of those parameters set up, and you can see what's starting to get pulled in. One thing I also need to do is make sure that it is shared with demo user, because that's the user we're going to use. Whoops, I didn't want to edit it though. We'll let it load a minute, then we'll go back. I wanted to go look at the share options for this test context variables. It is shared with demo 1, so if users are going to add these, obviously they need to have permissions to them. All right, so now it's shared. Let's jump back over to our teams and channels, and we have our Global Power Platform channel team that's created. So let's go in here and let's click to Power Apps. We've got a preview. Why not do the preview? And you'll see we have our test context variables. So if I go in and save this, we don't need to post to the channel about this tab, it'll add that application or that Power App, and it gets an issue. There's a list buried in there that you can't see, but you'll see this is where it's kind of cool. It starts showing us the locale. I'm in the US. Team type is 0. I can't remember what that associates to. I'm guessing that is public or private. You have to go look that up. Sub-entity ID, I'm not passing in any extra parameters, but then I have this team ID, I have a group ID, I have a channel ID, my user team role, I'm an owner, and this is that new one we passed in, where it shows the theme of dark. I will say I mentioned this before, there are some areas that starts falling apart. So I go in and add a channel. This is interesting. We'll leave it at that. We'll go in and do a private channel. And if you haven't played with private channels versus public, private creates a brand new SharePoint site in the background that's not associated with the main channel, which actually affects the way that some of this information is shown in the way it connects to Microsoft 365 groups. So if you remember way back in the beginning when we talked about provisioning and we talked about how every Microsoft team gets a Microsoft 365 group, and if you go in and create additional normal channels, so if we go in and add like a standard channel here, and this is standard, all it does is it creates another channel, and it's still associated with the same Microsoft 365 group. Nothing changes from that perspective, and we can actually see this by using standard, Power Apps, and we can add that same test context variables to it, and you'll see exact same group ID. From there, to here, 88 ends with AA4, standard 88, AA4. We're all good. However, this also means channel ID is 46BC7. You go look here, channel ID here is different. So you can also determine which channels you're in. However, a private channel, let's go in and do Teams and a Power Apps preview. And let's do our test context variable again, just to show you some of these values. There is no group ID with these. So it's a completely blank group ID because there's no Microsoft 365 group powering it. In fact, this is where it gets super wild. This team ID, you can actually notice that. Let's, here, just because, let's go and take a quick screenshot of it. And that's on the other monitor. I'll pull it back over. But remember that just remember this, team ID, DA4F06. You go in here and look at it. I don't even get the same team ID. It's a private channel. And here, just to prove it, here you go. Here is, let me go move that out of the way. Here's that team ID for the general channel, 19CC09. You don't even have the same channel ID here. There is no information that's the same between a private channel and a Teams channel. So this is going to come into play when we start looking at what else you can start doing with this. This has caused a few problems sometimes when I've tried to do this. So what I've started doing with this now is, for me, I'm in consulting. I have a different team for every client, and maybe there's different information I want about clients or I want to keep stored in my team. We're going to go back now to provisioning and tie all of this together. So you'll remember back when we created this in this provisioning, I brought up the fact that there's a hidden column out here, or it's not hidden, it's over here, that has the team ID. This is something new I've added recently. And here's that team ID. And you'll see this is that 88C3B. If you go over to here, it's that 88C3B. So now I have the ability to pull that in to a Power App. What you can do is, when I go back here to my Power Apps and I built this new team request, or not this team request, this team information. This is the Power App. There's a lot of similarities. I copied test context variables and did a few things to this. But let's go look at team information. This includes all those same context variables, but now when this app loads, we're going to go to my app load and we're going to look at not the start screen, but on start. I go, and let's get rid of this. I just commented this out. I don't need that anymore. I set this variable team based on a lookup to this group or team site request. So when this app loads now, it's actually looking back to this list over here, this group or team site request, and it is looking at the team ID in this particular list and grabbing the list item into variable team based on that group ID column. So now I can actually start pulling things in, like the team name or the team department. I could pull in the URL, so we could go here and insert a text label, and this could be the we could call this the team SharePoint URL. And let's expand this out. And this was actually from one of my other teams, so I should have a URL in here when I go add a text label. This could also be a button, so you can launch it from here. You can already get to SharePoint from there, so I don't know why you necessarily do that. But this is that variable team, and then all those list properties that we had. So if we look through this list, there will be that group display name. Here's that group URL. This has the name, the team ID, the title. This has created the department name, include Microsoft Teams. So we said we wanted maybe the group URL in here. That's the display name. We wanted the group URL. There we go. And here's that URL right here that's coming from my SharePoint list. So now you can start thinking about if you maybe even wanted people to update team names. You could actually allow people to manage their team right from here, where instead of this being a label, maybe this is a text box with a save button on it, and it writes that value back to that list, triggers another Power Automate flow, goes in and actually manually updates the team name. Now I get it. They're owners of it. They could just go in and manually do it. But this also allows you to pull in some of that extra list information. Maybe you want to know the customer name that it's for. Maybe the team name doesn't always reflect the customer name, or there's additional information if you are in consulting that you want to pull in about that particular client into the team. Maybe it could be things like bill rate. If it's a project one, it could be the number of hours that you have on the project. Any of that information now you can pull into this Power App. So let's go publish this and save this out, publish this version. And now that that's published, I did make this one available as well. Let's go back to this demo team and go in and add yet another Power App, only this time we're going to grab this team information one. Team information, we'll save this, and it's going to pull in all those same context variables, but you'll also notice now it pulls right in our team name, it pulls in that department, executive, and it pulls in that URL, all being pulled from this SharePoint list. So it opens up those possibilities of what information do you want to display about the team, or information that needs to be displayed that's unique to that team, that we did it in a SharePoint list. This could pull from a Dataverse database. This could pull from a SQL database, any data source that you want to incorporate, as long as when you go into that Power App and on Start, you go in and look up from that data source, set that variable information, set all that information based on that group ID so I can pull it all in. This is where, unfortunately, some of it starts falling apart when it comes to these private channels. This is great. I can put it on the team channel, but if I want to go in and pop this one onto a private channel, we can do Power Apps, pop this one on. We saw that that group ID didn't exist. So if I'm trying to pull team information into a private channel, it's just not going to pull it because there's no group ID. I can't use the team ID. Like, there's nothing I can reference. You'd almost have to build another Power App that allowed you to create private channels or shared channels, ran that flow, and updated something in that list with some of these additional team IDs or channel IDs when it came to those private channels. Again, other standard channels, this one would work just fine because it does maintain that same group and pulls in that group information. So this is how you can start now embedding Power Apps, getting more information into these teams as we go through it. So we looked at first provisioning teams, powering up your teams by provisioning new ones, building a Power App to allow people to request them, building a workflow on the back end to put approval in place to perform a lot of those activities, to go in and automatically create that team for you. Then we looked at building out a Power App and actually creating it as an app over here. So you can give it to your users. Here we go. We have it now for demo team. And they can go in and add these Power Apps into Teams as a standalone app for, oh, it doesn't think I have access to it, for doing things like requesting teams. So taking Power Apps and putting them in Teams this way. Then we looked at pulling in additional information to your teams by adding them as apps or tabs up at the top of your teams, pulling in those context variables, looking up to a data source to pull in additional information into that team from that list so people could see it. Again, I hope that helped. I hope this starts giving you some ideas, getting the wheels spinning in your head around different things that you can do with Power Apps within your environment, Power Automate within your environment to really combine Microsoft Teams and Power Apps to level up some of what you can do in Teams by taking advantage of Power Apps, Power Automate. We mentioned Power BI if you want to start tying reports in. Power Virtual Agent, some of those bots where you could even, instead of using forms, create a bot to do some of the same information. If you do have any questions, if I wasn't able to be here to participate in the chat, feel free to reach out via email, bstedgink@intelligent.com, reach out on LinkedIn, connect with me, send me questions there. Head over to my website, fill out the contact form there as well. Finally, do please fill out the survey. Let us know what you thought about the session, win some swag. We love feedback, good or bad. It helps us as presenters improve. It helps those people organizing the conference to make these conferences better for you in the future. I also do have a resource slide in here, a bunch of websites for my newsletter, training, podcast, YouTube, Twitter, Threads. And again, just search for Ben Stedjink if you're looking for me, if you want to connect and have questions. So the links to some of those websites I showed as well are in the slides if you want to go grab those. Thank you again for attending this session. I hope you found it valuable, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.